Hello and welcome to the October 2018 edition of the Plympton Podcast. I'm Andrew Hill. This month we chat with an Ivybridge author. We hear about a special milestone reached by a befriending charity, and we speak with two befriending deaf ladies about the hearing dogs and the work of the charity Hearing Dogs for the Deaf. Tony Ray is a local author who has published two books, the most recent called Red Sky over Dartmoor. He appeared on Charlotte Willis's Tea Time Treats programme on Hospital Radio, where he started by giving her some information on his background.
Well, I'm not from the southwest originally. I come from Salford, which is up in Greater Manchester. But I've lived down here for a long time now. I'm racking my brain. 1987, came down into the area to work as a school teacher in Kingsbridge. History teacher, as it happens. Done other jobs since then, now very happily semi-retired and trying to do as much writing as I can. And I live in Ivybridge, which is probably going to crop up later in our chat.
And what inspired you to write a book?
I've always wanted to write. It's not the first book that I've written, but it's the first and so far the only fiction that I've written. I think I said earlier, I worked as a history teacher. Always been interested in history, always been interested in the First World War. When I was working as a teacher, I wrote some school textbooks, 3 of them actually. And we'll probably talk later about how long Red Sky took me to write. But in between starting writing it and it being published, I also wrote a history book about South Devon in the Great War, which was published, I think, in 2016.
I'll have to check that out, because I know there's a lot of local, I don't want to spoil too much, but there's a local history in here, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on.
It is. It's locally based. And, I have used a lot of, what should we say, a lot of fact, historical fact, comes into the historical fiction. So it's kind of bringing the both together.
And we'll hear more from Tony Ray later in this podcast. Doreen and Joan are two profoundly deaf ladies whose daily lives have been much improved by having a hearing dog. I caught up with them at the Herod House Coffee Bar during the Hearing Dogs for Deaf People's Week there to find out more.
Well, I'm Doreen Bell and my dog is Casper. He is my second hearing dog. I had a very good one for many years, but sadly she died. And I had the replacement dog I have now, Casper. And amazingly, time goes so quickly. I've had Casper for 6 years now. And so what does Casper do for me? Well, Casper is my ears. I am very deaf. And when the phone rings, Casper comes, touches me, and we use hand signals. We extend our hands and then say to the dog, "What is it?" when he touches you. And the dog then responds by taking you to the source of the sound. So that's I think I said telephone. Of course, front door. And the dog's favourite thing, of course, the cooker timer, which means there's food in the oven. That's definitely Casper's favourite. The important thing, too, I found when I lost my first dog and I was without a dog for just a few weeks, it was difficult to wake up in the morning. And so it's a question that is another very valuable thing, and the one I missed most of all, I think, was the fact that he hears the alarm clock and then he sleeps in his own bed beside me. But as soon as the alarm clock goes off, he jumps on the bed and then I get awoke with a few licks across the face, which is quite a pleasant way. If you like dogs, it's quite a pleasant way to be woke up. So that's really a very valuable thing. Am I forgetting? I'm going to...
Can't hear.
Sorry?
I couldn't hear what you were saying.
Oh, this is the problem. We can't hear. But it says, I think I've covered it. So front door, telephone.
What about when the smoke alarm goes off? What happens then?
Oh, well, with the smoke alarm, they come and touch you, and you respond as usual with the hands outstretched, and the dog lies right down flat. That is an indication of danger, and so then it's up to you to investigate or get out, whatever is more suitable. This is probably the only way in which a hearing dog is likely to save your life, but it is an important one, very important. He would also tell me, of course, the
carbon monoxide.
The carbon monoxide alarm.
Yes, that thing.
Yes.
So what do they do the same with that? How would you know which one it was?
That's a very good question. I haven't tried both, but I mean, obviously you would investigate. Mine are not very far apart, so I wouldn't have to do much investigation.
And what about like outside with traffic conditions and things like that?
Traffic. They really have not the same use outdoors as they have indoors, in as much as they do not alert you in any way. They're just companions. That's another thing, of course. If, like Joan and I both live on our own, it's the companionship that you get from people stopping to talk to the dogs. It does give you a sort of intro to other people, which is very valuable when you live alone. But that would be the only real use of the dog outdoors.
You mentioned you had another dog before you had Casper. Obviously, they've got their own individual characteristics, but were they sort of on a par in terms of how they were able to deal with the various things they needed to do?
I'm glad you asked me that, because two dogs couldn't be more different. The other dog was a bitch. And, of course, this one is a male dog. And it's funny, no offence, but he does have male characteristics. There are times when he doesn't challenge me really, but he challenges me with a look. If I'm insisted that he does something that he doesn't want to do, then he will look at me and hesitate. Whereas the other dog, she was a dear, obedient dog. I love this one very much. He is a lovely, lovely, kind dog. But the other dog, the first one, was excellent. She came really, really, really well trained, and she, right to the end, and it was very sad. She died as she lived, quite peacefully in my arms. I realised that she was ill, waiting for the vet to come, and it was obvious that what was going to happen.
When it came to them sort of doing the specific things, like alerting you to the fact the cooker timer might have gone off and things like that, did they do it identically, or did they have their own individual ways of doing that?
Yes, even that. Jingle being a bitch was slightly smaller, daintier in a way, and so she would just very gently touch me. Casper comes up, he's got huge paws, as you might notice, and he gives me a big clump. And it's funny, I have bruises on my legs, but it's so funny. He's got such big paws, which he loves to. That's one of his pet tricks. He likes to give you his paw.
Right. The Elder Tree is a befriending charity which has been going for 25 years now. From humble beginnings as a church group, it has grown into one of Plymouth's major charities with 125 volunteers, more than 71 weekly activities and around 1,200 beneficiaries. They recently held a 25th anniversary barn dance in the Guildhall in Plymouth, and that's where we go now in this podcast to hear firstly from the Elder Tree's Chief Executive, Robbie Nairn OBE.
This is the 25th year that the Elder Tree Befriending has been working in Plymouth. And we thought it was a really good way to celebrate it. We've got 280 people here who are our beneficiaries from across the city, and they're here to have a good time, dance, have a cream tea, and enjoy the moment.
My name is Susan Kelland. I'm an Elder Tree member. I've come along today for the barn dance and the cream tea, which is another little social occasion that we have with Elder Tree. We have many little functions like this, and we really look forward to it. I've been involved with Elder Tree for about 5-6 years now. I moved to a new area. I moved in from Plymouth to Lipson Vale, and then I become ill. And I was ill for about 6 years, having treatment and what have you, and was housebound. And so when I've started to get out and around, I thought I'd join Elder Tree because I, lost contact with my friends from where I used to live, and it was the best thing I ever done. Because I've made friends, I'm out and about now, and it gave me rather a new lease of life.
Carol Burgoyne MBE is Plymouth City Council's Strategic Director for People. What does she see as the Elder Tree's importance?
Eldertree is one of our most important services in terms of how it provides befriending for older people across the city. They are providing services to ensure people who are living in their own homes have somewhere to go, meet friends, do activities. As you will see here today, they're having a fantastic time dancing. I've also been along to another session with Birmingham Royal Ballet where they were exercising, and there is just so much enjoyment in what they do.
More now about hearing dogs for deaf people. Doreen explained to me the process for training hearing dogs.
Once they're able to leave their mothers are old enough, they go with very helpful people we call socialisers. Socialisers then take the dogs into their homes and they sort of like do the initial training. The initial training for any dog, you know, the toilet procedures and sit and all those sort of things. They do the rudimentary training, and then I think the procedure is slightly different now, but I will tell you what I know and what I did. So once the dogs are sufficiently acclimatised, for the want of a better word, they then go back to the training centre where they are trained for the same sound work. And that is what happens. Once the dog is sufficiently trained in the sound work, then someone who's waiting for a dog is invited up to the centre, and then you are trained in the same way. You're trained how to handle the dog, so that you follow on with the training as the dog has been owning it.
So what happens? Is the dog chosen for you, or do you have any say in which dog you end up having?
No. Well, as far as I know, no one has any say in it. They've obviously assessed you before, and then they choose a dog that they think is the most likely to be successful with you. As you can see, Joan has a small dog.
Yeah. So what's the breed of yours?
Mine's a working Cocker Spaniel. My previous one was a Springer Cocker Cross.
Right, okay. And is there a particular type of dog that they tend to go for in training up?
We do a lot of spaniels, spaniel crosses. We do a lot of the poodle spaniel crosses. Poodles, we have found, the most intelligent dogs of all. And so they are particularly useful if people are not very strong and they want a small dog, as Joan was. And so, actually, if I was to choose a dog now, I think I would opt for a Spaniel Poodle cross, because you get the best of both worlds there.
Okay. Right, well, let me come over here to Joan. Okay, then, Joan, now, why was a small dog like this one more suitable for you?
It wasn't the size, it was the non-molting.
Oh, right.
And I asked if I could have a poodle, but was told that maybe or maybe not. But I was lucky. And I wanted small because I thought it'd be a bit much to handle.
Okay, and what's yours called?
Clover.
Clover, right, okay.
But she is retired now.
I see, right, yeah. Okay. Explain that to us, and why she retired.
Age, and she is, don't laugh, she is losing her hearing.
All right.
And her sight. And she's got arthritis. But she's still happy, so the vet says that's quite all right. But she can't do her job anymore.
Right, okay. So what happens? And have you got another dog as well, or not?
I will get another one when she goes. I could have had one with her, but I don't want two dogs.
No.
A, it's fording. B, it's managing two dogs, you know. And I'd have to leave her home, take the other one with me, and that's not fair.
No.
I'm coping.
Okay. And so was Clover your first dog?
Yes. I've had her for 14 years.
Wow.
She's almost 15.
Okay. So how do you manage now then, if she doesn't sort of...
With difficulty. The biggest problem I found is that's alarm clock, because I've got a cochlear implant. Because when I go to bed, that comes off. So I'm profoundly deaf. And I do worry about waking up in time. The telephone I can hear if I'm near it. And the rest of it, well, I just cope. because I just don't want to.
Well, I suppose that's it, isn't it? After 14 years, you'll have built up a bond that you don't really want to break.
I could have given her to one of the family and had another one, but I just didn't want to do that at all.
So how is she about the house then, generally? How is she about the house generally?
Yeah, she's fine. She sleeps a lot these days,
right.
But she's quite happy to go out, and she loves greeting people. So she's happy in herself.
I think that's the point, isn't it? Because both these dogs seem quite friendly. I suppose that has to be one of the characteristics, doesn't it?
Training, really. If they don't interact with other dogs, they're failed. They don't call it a failure, but they've got to be really perfect in every way. If they chase cats, they fail them, don't they? It's surprising the things. They've got to be really perfect, as it were. Mm-hmm. But they are taking longer to train them. When I had her, I brought her home on her first birthday. So she just had 12 months training. But they're nearer 2 years now, I think it is.
We return now to local author Tony Ray. He started the second part of his chat with Charlotte Willis by explaining how long it took him to write his book Red Sky over Dartmoor.
It took me about 15 years from starting it to finishing it. I wasn't working, all the time just writing Red Sky. But I've done a lot of historical research. I'm really interested in the First World War, but I wanted to write a kind of a whodunit, a murder mystery. And I thought, well, where would be the most ideal place to commit a murder and not be found out? And I thought, well, in a war. So what Red Sky is about, it's set in the last year of the First World War. It's about dastardly deeds that are committed in the trenches by a couple of anti-heroes. And then the good guys, my invention, Captain Mark Bergeron, and his, I could read it off the back cover, but I think I can remember it, his gritty Irish sidekick, Bombardier Ryan. Basically, what they do, they come to Devon after the war to track down... I'm not going to give away any ending, but their task is to track down these ne'er-do-wells who've committed a dastardly crime. So it's a bit of a weld together of a lot of factual history about the war and South Devon after the war and what it was like. But it's got this theme of retribution coming back and wreaking revenge.
So we were talking about there's a local feel in this book, and I stumbled on Colmord, Diptford, I think it's pronounced.
That's the one.
And South Brent.
And South Brent, yeah.
How did that sort of... Have you... Obviously, I take it you go out and about on the moor.
Absolutely. I love walking on Dartmoor. Bergeron, who's the hero in the book, or one of the two heroes, when he comes back to Devon after the war, he needs to do some finding out, and he doesn't want to be noticed, so he makes a camp on the moor. And I've walked those routes that I describe in the book myself. I can actually walk on Dartmoor from my house without having to get a bus or get in the car, first of all. I was originally going to set most of the action in Ivybridge, but I thought it was a little bit too close to home. I also thought if I ever became a really famous author, I might have lots of people stalking me. So I set it more in the villages round. So South Brent, for example, a lot of the action takes place in South Brent. I did a talk in South Brent last year, and somebody in the audience who'd read the book, he said, I know exactly which house you're writing about there. He said, I know the person who lives in it now. So that was nice for me to listen to, because it shows that somebody from that place or who lives in that place could read the book and they could see that it's based on the geography, on the reality.
We've been hearing in this episode from two profoundly deaf ladies, Doreen and Joan, who have hearing dogs. Joan explained to me the problems she had encountered being out and about in daily life.
I have been had people coming up behind me and tutting because they said excuse me, and I've obviously not heard. But with the dog, with their coat, it's very distinctive. Then they realise, and you get an apology usually. And supermarkets, the girls usually look down when they're putting the things through. I've got to demonstrate. But they see the dog and they look at you and speak to you, which is a great help.
Yeah.
Because you can't see deafness. And it is very isolating, deafness. Deafness is a very invisible disability, and the hearing dog makes it visible.
So how was it you come to lose your hearing? Was it sort of something that happened spontaneously, or did it happen over a period of time, or how did it happen?
It was a short period of time, but I'd always had ear infections, and it took about 2 weeks. And I remember sitting in front of my bus one day and bursting into tears and saying, how am I going to do my job? I don't know how I'm going to do my job. And then a couple of days after that, I was in hospital in a total silent world. I did do my job in the end.
Okay. What was it you did?
I worked in the dockyard in the security department. So my main job was giving people security clearance and issuing passes. So a lot of meeting the public who were very, very good, because I made a sign for myself saying, I am deaf. Please speak slowly and clearly, and they were all very good.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose this was probably in the day before all the legislation came in for equalities and stuff like that for people with disabilities.
That was 21 years ago when I lost my hearing. So, yes, things have progressed considerably since then in all sorts of disabilities, not just hearing. But like we've said before, hearing is the disability that is invisible and very hard to describe for a normal hearing person to suddenly lose their hearing. I presume if you're born deaf, it's different. But to be suddenly plunged into a silent world was terrible.
I mean, it's probably difficult for someone not in that situation to fully imagine, but it must be quite disconcerting to suddenly find yourself in that position.
It certainly is, and you say to people, I'm profoundly deaf, and they say, but surely you can hear that. Some noise. No, profound means profound. There's nothing. Can't even hear myself speaking.
And obviously you've got the cochlear implant now, and things like that have improved dramatically over the years, haven't they?
It's improved since I've had it. I've had 3 different ones since I had the operation, and it has improved considerably. Still find it difficult in noisy areas, and one disappointment in my cochlear implant is I cannot hear music. All music is just horrible sound. But the one thing I can still hear, which I love, is the sound of the sea.
That is odd, isn't it? Why you should be able to hear that. And
very soothing.
I suppose it's to do with the frequency it's on, I suppose.
I think it is frequencies, because it's all, what do they call it? Well, it's all to do with frequencies. When they test me almost like playing piano notes. Is it too loud, too soft and all that? And 1 or 2 of them weren't right with me, and I think that's why the music is no good, and that is great disappointment to me, really. We put up with it.
Back now to the final part of our conversation with local author Tony Ray. He explained where he got some of the names for the characters in his book.
Ivybridge. I just love the name. I came across it reading about Ivybridge, and apparently in the late 19th century, if I've got my dates right, Ivybridge was a blacksmith in Ivybridge, and I just loved the name, and I thought, we don't get names like that these days. I know that Trant as a surname is a local name. There are various Trants, or branches of the family, I suppose, across the South Hams, but that name, Eber, I actually invented him a brother as well called Elijah, Eber and Elijah Trant. So Eber Trant is there because I love the name. And Eber Trant is a singer. He's like I suppose, a folk singer, usually unaccompanied. I think I say he's got a rich baritone voice. And at one part of the book, he starts singing. The other soldiers are egging him on a bit, and he starts singing Widdicombe Fair. And the soldiers say, no, you've got to make it more Ivybridge based. So he changes the name. So instead of Tom Pierce and Uncle Tom Cobley, he changes the names. And the names that he uses are actually, I took them off the Ivybridge War Memorial. And they are men who lived in Ivybridge. Most of them, well, those people actually died in the war. That's another bit of research that I've been doing.
Yeah.
It's almost coming to an end, but we've got a local magazine, a monthly magazine in Ivybridge, and in August 2014, I started writing something every month for every month of the war.
Oh, right, okay.
And I've got 1 month to go, which is November.
Okay, I'll have to check this magazine out. What was the magazine called? Because
It's called the Ivy Mag. The Ivy Mag, yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So for those of you who live at Ivybridge, check out the Ivy Mag then, obviously.
They'll all have been reading it, Charlotte, if they're from Ivybridge, yeah.
I live at Plympton, so I haven't seen it. Obviously need to go to Ivybridge and have a look at it.
You do?
Yeah. Are there any more novels planned for the future?
Well, that's a fantastic question. Yes, but not just novels. I mean, part of my problem as a writer is that I've got many more ideas than I've got time to get them down. So when you get to the end, it's set up for the sequel.
All right, brilliant.
So Bergeron and Ryan return because basically they don't complete their mission in this book. They're not entirely unsuccessful, dropping a few hints, but they don't complete their mission. So the follow-up is called The Road to Enniskeen, and they actually go back to Ireland. They're still following their retribution mission, but they get embroiled in the Black and Tans War in Ireland, which took place after the First World War. I've got half of it written. But I've got some other projects on the burner as well, so it's kind of it's there. It's half written. I know how it's going to finish, but I've yet to complete that. So you might want to ask me about the other projects.
Yeah, what is the other project? I've just got you on. I was actually going to say that.
Good. So as we said earlier, I'm first and foremost interested in history and the First World War. Fiction, I enjoy writing as well, but the book that's probably going to be next off the conveyor belt is called In Step with the Devons, and it's going to be a mixture of history and kind of like a tourist guide. It's going to be a series of walks. So that title, In Step with the Devons means the Devonshire Regiment, but also the people of Devon that took part in the war. I've been to France twice this year doing research for that. So I was over in end of May this year with some soldiers actually from the Rifles, who are the descendant regiment from the Devonshire Regiment, and there was a commemoration there and a service because May, can't remember the date, I think it was the 28th of May, was a big battle where the 2nd Battalion of the Devonshire Regiment almost wiped out actually, but as a reward for their action they were awarded the French Croix de Guerre. And soldiers in the Rifles nowadays, they still wear the ribbon of the Croix de Guerre on their uniform, and that comes from 1918. And I went out again 2 weeks ago, doing some research around the Somme battlefield, where I visited the graves of some of the local men on the centenary of their death. And one of them was actually a really interesting character, or he seems to have been, obviously I never knew him, from Ermington, which is near Ivybridge.
Right, okay, yeah.
He was called Horace Backhouse. He ran the pub there, which was called the New Inn. He was a member of the Freemasons, and he joined the army. He was a lieutenant, not in the local regiment. He actually joined the Royal Lancaster Regiment for some reason. And sadly, he was killed on the 23rd, got my dates right, 23rd of August 1918. So my wife and I visited his grave and we put a rose on the gravestone because the day before, my wife, she's called Jane, she'd read on a gravestone, some mother had written, "Please put a flower on my son's grave." And she was really saddened by that, but she said, "I'm going to put a flower on." So we did that on the morning. We then drove 400 miles to get to Roscoff to get the ferry back to the UK. Next day, when I looked on my Twitter, there was a photograph of the gravestone with the rose that my wife had placed there and a photograph of that soldier, Horace Backhouse. And somebody from his family had gone out as well. We missed them by about half an hour. But I really feel now quite an attachment to him. He's still got family. I'm in touch with this woman who lives in Sussex. I'm in touch with some of his descendants in the States. They've sent me a photograph of him. They sent me a photograph of his wallet that he was given by the Masons and a photograph of the Christmas present that all the soldiers were given in 1914, the first Christmas of the war. And I'm going to be writing that story up, but also with a walk that will take anybody interested through some of the cemeteries around that part of France, explain how he came by his death on that day. So that's the next project, In Step with the Devons.
And more information about Tony Ray and his books can be found on his website, tonyray.co.uk. Ray spelled REA. And now to our final piece on hearing dogs. Not only do the dogs have to be trained, but so too do the deaf people they're going to live with, as Joan explained to me.
Yes, you need to be trained into the right signals for the dog and know exactly what they're doing. And I found it quite hard, actually. But once you've got that, it's there forever.
So most often you have to sort of hold your arms out to indicate to the dog, well, what are you on about, or something like that?
The main thing is the arms wide. When it's hard to describe it and talking, but that is the sign of your arms wide. As soon as they touch you, and then they take you. So
that's a signal. Well, what's wrong then? That's a signal to the dog. You're saying, well, what is it that's wrong?
It says, if you can say, what is it? Because some deaf people can't speak, but you can say what is it as well as signal with your hands, and then the dog will take you to the sound, or in the case of the danger, fire alarm, or like you say, carbon monoxide, they lay down and you know immediately that's danger. Get out. Don't go to the sound.
Okay, so you're both involved in the local group, but what sort of size is it?
Yeah, about 8, and it's varied a bit because some have come that had dogs and then they've lost their dogs and they haven't had replacements. But we're getting less people now and we're getting older, which doesn't help. And because we're not raising as much money as we used to, we're now not allowed to call ourselves a branch. We're just fundraisers, not a branch.
So you've got to be a group instead.
But we've been a branch for 18 years.
So if you can cast your mind back 14 years, this must have made quite a difference to you, when she came along here.
I lost my hearing 21 years ago now, and I didn't put in for a dog until I retired because the dog wouldn't have been able to help me at work. They can do. So when I retired, I put in for a dog, and that's when we started the branch. I've been retired 19 years.
Okay, and here we are today at Harewood House trying to raise some funds to keep going.
Well, yeah, we try. We've sort of diversified from what we're doing. We're happier doing things like this, and tabletops and things and that, rather than going somewhere in a field with a gazebo and all that sort of thing. Yeah. But we are making a bit of money.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And in terms of the dogs that get chosen, I suppose it's important they don't pull too much as well when walking.
This one pulls a bit. He really, they should never have passed him. But she doesn't. And that's again, they try not to let them be like that. She's at long last lying down.
Yes, I must admit that he wasn't as well trained as Jingle, who came perfectly trained. He's always pulled, and as you may or may not realise, I am rather ancient and therefore somewhat frail, so the pulling is a problem. But he makes up for it in all the other ways. He's a very affectionate, very devoted dog, great company.
Well, that's it for another month. Theme music for this podcast has been provided by audionautics.com. Hope you found our features this month interesting and informative. Thanks for listening, and until the next time, bye for now.
The Plympton Podcast.